Perfect. So here with Nate Brakeley, ex-USA Rugby, and actually went out as captain in your final test, I believe. So fantastic. So Nate, firstly, let's catch up with you. What have you been up to since retirement?
Uh, since retirement, kind of had decided to do all my life changes at once. Moved to Boston, had a kid. So it's just all coming at once, and so it's been. And actually, you can probably hear. Actually, let me close this door real quick.
No
Sorry.
problem, no problem.
So big life changes all at once. But it's been fun. It's been good, and it's been a good way to shift away from what was my life for 20 years, give or take.
Fantastic. Well, firstly, congratulations. That's unbelievably excited, and you're looking very fresh for having a newborn, I have to say. So, congratulations on that. So okay, all the changes at once. That's yeah, obviously big life stuff. So no time for rugby, I take it at all in terms of coaching or anything.
I've done a few sessions here or there. I'm still heavily involved at Dartmouth, where I went to college, and so I've chipped in there a few times, but nothing with any real formality. Definitely wasn't looking to kind of get back on that horse of the daily grind. And so, as much as I love staying involved with the game, was I definitely needed to take a break and kind of reassess where we were.
Absolutely. Well, I guess the big question is, how long do you think it'll take for the itch to come back to get you on the sidelines consistently?
Well, I've gone to a handful of Free Jacks games up here, and and every time you see, especially because it's all my mates still playing, that I certainly miss the matches and the match day and the match day experience. But then I have to remind myself about all of the grind that goes on behind the scenes, in MLR, especially in terms of travel and just that lifestyle is very attritional, and there's a reason why I was aching at the end of every season and last season especially.
Well, glad to hear you're not aching quite as much, which is always always good. So that leads nicely onto my first question. What have you made of the MLR season to date? Obviously, we've got the playoffs coming up. So, what has been, I guess let's start with what's been your biggest standout? What's been your biggest takeaway in terms of who's impressed you the most? We can be a team first, I guess, and then
Yeah, I mean, I think Dallas has been really fun to watch. I think to look at a team like that started as a new team and was bottom of the barrel whipping boy of the league, and has just year over year steadily improved and has gotten some pretty good scalps this year, and is a real dark horse playoff contender. On the back of a strong ball, which has always been a good way to make a name for yourself in the MLR. That's been great to see. I think Houston similarly has finally put all their pieces together that we saw the kind of the start of in years past, and is now looking very dangerous and very strong, and has got to be, if not one of the odds-on favorites to win the whole thing. And then in the East, I think the big surprise there is obviously they've had some ups and downs, but both DC and NOLA with some really strong wins as well, showing that on their day they can beat just about anybody. And this will be NOLA's first ever foray into the playoffs, which is hard to believe. But especially if they get a home playoff match and somebody has to go down there in the swamps in July, August, talk about home field advantage. That's going to be fun to watch.
yeah, right. I mean, no, Nola's a really interesting one. I think they really have caught everybody off guard. And again, I guess like you said, they've had a couple of dips throughout the season, but their high point is as good as anyone, really. Which is really interesting. On that, in terms of Miami and Chicago, what have you made of them this season, and how exciting of a step is it into those new markets for the MLR?
Yeah, so Chicago, it's been good to see them string some wins together this year. I think people were expecting them to be more of a contender last year, and to see with a few new pieces this year that again on their day they can be a very competitive team, and so I'm excited to see how they go. Miami, it's absolutely a long time coming that we've had a team down in Florida in that area, and again, I think that the way we see these new teams struggle in the league is actually it's a good sign that the league is not one where you can drop in a bunch of mercenaries and take it over. That the kind of the skill floor is high enough that you need to be a more cohesive team to figure it out. And so it's been fun to watch Miami, but I think it's also been been good for the league to see that the established powers can still handle the newcomers, no matter how much foreign flair they may bring in from South America.
Well, this is it, exactly right. That's really interesting, and I mean, you kind of touched on it at the start with obviously your connections with Dartmouth. In terms of college players coming into the MLR, who would you sort of highlight, sort of two or three players that we should keep an eye on for next season?
Well, I think that you got to assume that the boys that are in that USA pool are going to be are making their way in. Dom Bisag and Eric Storty, and so seeing where they land. I guess I haven't watched too much of the U20s, and so I can't comment too much on where that's going. But I think that the Anthem team as well has showcased a lot of young talent. And I think what we've seen as well is the fact that some of these boys are now able to step right into MLR is
Mhm.
a really good sign for the collegiate landscape and probably the USA pathways, that they're getting enough exposure to quote unquote men's rugby that they can step into these teams and actually contribute. Because I think early days we would see a lot of those draft picks struggle as
Mhm.
they encounter the huge gap that can exist between American collegiate rugby and MLR, which is and has international stars playing in it. And it's good to see that step is less drastic now that those guys can come in and contribute.
Yeah, that's interesting. I don't know. Have you seen much of the World Rugby in terms of round one with the World Rugby Under 20 Championship? I don't know if you saw much of that as of yet.
Other than the scores, I've not seen too much now.
No, no, that's great. Well, it's interesting to hear that, the USA players physically will be ready for that sort of level because, I mean, those players at the under 20 championship, the gap between them and test players is just closing and closing. So it's yeah, a big one because I guess, in the build up to 2031, it's going to be crucial that they really are playing at that level, right? Because you need that pool of talent coming through. Which is I guess kind of the next step on that. So in terms of, there's France, obviously, even though it went a bit pear-shaped in the quarterfinal, they obviously really built up from sort of 2015 on. Is that sort of, can you see that? I know you're not day to day with USA Rugby, and in that, can you see those structures being put in place currently?
Yeah, 100%. And I think that obviously he's a great coach as far as the on match day itself. But I think one area that Scott really thrives in is putting these structures and pathways in place.
Mhm.
He's a guy that knows the USA Rugby landscape. You saw mentioned in the squad press release that they're going to do some joint training camps with the U18s and U20s with the men's Eagles. And it really is about identifying it and cultivating this talent early, because as many athletes as America has, you're always playing catch up if you wait till after college to capture them and start to bring them up to our level. And you have a few examples like Caleb Geiger that is found in a bar in Colorado and turned into an international rugby player, but it's not a scalable, sustainable method. And so how do we take 1,000 USA rugby collegiate players and just by process of averages spit out 5 to 10 international pathway caliber players every graduating year, and that's how we start to fill that player pool.
No, that's very interesting. I mean, it's on that. I'm not sure when, in terms of when we last spoke, if Scott had already had the interim tag removed. I don't think he had at that point. But obviously, like you're saying, it's great to have someone who knows the landscape, and he's got Nick Easter now in his setup. You had contact with Nick, I take it, towards the end. What did you make of Nick? I actually interviewed him about a month ago, and he's a heck of a character. So just how useful he's going to be to the USA. I think he's with them for at least another 2 seasons. So.
Yeah, certainly a character. But he's somebody that's played and coached at the highest level. And that type of knowledge is something that just doesn't exist in USA. And so being able to bring someone like that in, and I think that's exactly where these more kind of international experienced personalities fit in really well, is in those position coaches, in the forwards coaches, in the scrums coaches. I love that we have an American as the head guy, but being able to bring in Nick to share his knowledge and be part of that crew is great. And forwards and scrums is a part of the game that there's, as the joke always goes, the dark arts or whatever, what have you. That there's just not this osmosis of knowledge transfer in America that you get in other countries. And so being able to bring in somebody that can hopefully help kickstart some of that, and upskill the USA boys, is great.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I guess it's a nod towards Scott, right? That someone like Nick is comfortable to come over and work in the setup. So that's, I mean, it's a real nod to him. You talked about the dark arts and the forward pack. David Ayanu playing for Toulouse. I mean, what an experience in a top 14 final to come on and obliterate the Bordeaux pack at scrum time. Just what would he bring to the squad? How exciting is it to see, a USA player? I believe he's not even in his he's just coming up to his mid-20s. I mean, he's still so
Yeah.
young. I mean, just how exciting is that to have someone like that in and around the
Yeah,
set?
so Davey first showed up, at a USA camp, it was one of my first ones. He first showed up when he was like 16.
Yeah.
Showed up to training, this kid, baby face, and started melting people. And we were like, who is this? And then disappeared overseas. But someone like that, and it's great that we get him when we get him. It's unfortunate that we only get him for USA camps, so that knowledge transfer isn't necessarily happening over an MLR season. But having someone like that, the confidence you see in the team, in the squad, when he comes in, and we know that we're locked down at scrum time, that historically USA has been pretty up and down in. It really can't be overstated that when we go to pack down, we know we got Davey up there. We know that side of the scrum is taken care of, and we can worry about ourselves. So it's been real fun having him around. And that goes for the other boys that have that kind of international experience as well. When AJ's in camp, when Greg's in camp, it's just great hearing from them and listening to their experiences.
Yeah, and you just touched on it there. I mean, you talk about the pack and having Greg coming back from Glasgow, playing back in the MLR. I mean, obviously, further down the track than David in terms of the career, but again, another experienced operator in and around that squad. So I guess invaluable for them. And AJ McGinty, obviously, his career speaks for itself too, with everywhere he's been in terms of the URC, well, I guess Pro 14 and then the Premiership and things like that, which is really exciting. And in terms of more of a macro view on USA Rugby, obviously there was a change in terms of the CEO side of things with Ross Young, and I'm hoping that I'm going to get this pronounced right. I've just got it, Bill Goran coming in terms of I'm hoping I'm getting his surname pronounced correctly. But Bill's obviously got experience, in major American sports. Do you think that was something that not necessarily that was missing from USA Rugby, but that is just another feather in the cap as you build towards a major tournament in the US?
Yeah, I think yeah, I think it's probably fair to say that it's missing. Is I think that if you look at what some of the MLR teams have been able to do as far as building fan bases out of people that don't care about rugby and may not even care that much about sport. You go to a Free Jacks game, you go to a San Diego Legion game, you go to a Seattle game, and people are lining up ahead of time. People are tailgating, and there's definitely some rugby diehards there, but especially now that MLR has been going on for 7 years now, how many of those folks have decided that they were looking for something to do on the weekends and someone to back, and have found that community? And I think that MLR has really shown that if we as Americans want to think creatively about how to market the sport of rugby, that there's huge opportunity to bring it to new audiences. And especially if you look at price point for American sport in general now, that you can either spend $40 to bring the whole family to an MLR game, or you can spend 400 to go sit in the nosebleeds at a football game. In theory, that's a no-brainer, right? So how do we get all those people excited about USA Rugby? And Americans love America. They love supporting. The Olympics are coming up, and I'm about to go cheer for shot put, really, really aggressively for the next 1 week, and then forget about it. But how do we build that intensity around all of the USA Test matches so we aren't playing in Glendale, that we are filling out the Soldier Fields every time there's a Test match.
Yeah.
The more experience we can bring in to build that groundswell is great.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. I mean, it's the same as I mean, any big tournament, right? I mean, you've got the football Euros on at the moment, where a load of people probably don't watch football at all, and then they're suddenly highly invested in everything that's going on, which is interesting because I mean, the USA in terms of sevens, they're always there or thereabouts. There's always a chance, even if it's not a great season, they've just got the talent there to do it. Firstly, how do you rate their chances at the Olympics? Both the men's and the women's, putting you on the spot on that. Sorry about that. And then, like you said, secondly, in terms of capturing that new audience, Americans want to get behind Americans. A gold medal or a silver, bronze, whatever might come, just how valuable is that for capturing those next generation of audience, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, I think again, the Olympics is a real cool opportunity for rugby to put its hand up in the same way that the world gets around the women's soccer team. Is it's an easy to understand variant of the game. There's medals on the line. We're competing against other countries. And so hopefully NBC or whoever owns it now is putting that front and center for everyone to see how sweet a sport it is. The women and Alona Maher obviously has a huge following. So how do we tap that into, or sorry, tap into that, and hopefully that we see the results that I think that possibly in years past we haven't quite gotten where we'd like to be in terms of medals. But as you said, it both men and women on their day can beat anyone on that circuit, and so it's very exciting. But with only 12 teams, it's also one slip up and you're out of luck. So which is the best way to do this, right? It's the most exciting way to do this. So hopefully we'll see great results out of both teams. I'm expecting big things, and I'm sure they are of themselves as well. So it'll be great to watch.
Yeah. A nice way of dodging a final position there, Nate. I appreciate that. That was good. But big things is good.
Well, I'll give you my final position is medals for both. And on their day, either that could be anywhere from gold to bronze for both teams.
Love to hear it. That's a good answer. That's a good one. Reverting back to the 15. So obviously, there's an exciting summer ahead. Oh, you've got Romania, Scotland, and then there's also the Pacific Nations series coming up, which is, I mean, you've got your closest neighbors in Canada, and then you've also got Japan under Eddie Jones, which is always going to be interesting. So starting with the summer tests, what is a successful series for the USA in 2024?
Yeah, I think if you look at the games they have coming up, all of them are winnable. Romania, if the results hold from the fall, and that should be a USA win. And then if you look at Scotland again, it's another young Scotland team coming over here, and we're playing on our soil with a new energy that I think that game becomes winnable. And I think also what's also exciting is the way that Scott is coaching the team to play. Is he wants to establish a real American identity, which means aggressive, opportunistic rugby. And if the pieces of that come off, there's no shortage of athletes in that squad that can make things happen, that can make exciting rugby happen. And so I think that they're going to be going into that game expecting a win. Me as the casual observer, if I see us play them tight and go well, am I going to be proud of them? Yeah, absolutely. But I think a win is what the communication is going to be in camp.
Yeah, no doubt. And then I guess when you go to the Pacific Nation Series, on the back of two wins is huge. And Japan, Eddie's obviously at the start of his project there. So it'll be interesting as is Scott with kind of the start of the project there. So there's a real opportunity for a knockout series. I guess from the outside looking in, Fiji have to be the favorites going into the tournament, but they're on the other side of the draw. So I guess for you, success in that series, what are you taking from that?
Yeah, again, it's if we look if we look at this as a whole, is your American supporter of yesteryear is going to say, obviously we beat Romania and Canada, and then if we compete with the other two, that's a good showing. But that's why we've been tier two for our entire existence. That the expectation needs to be that we are beating these kind of that we are beating the teams that we have the opportunity to beat. And a full Scotland team is different from the team that's being sent over. And so these kind of tier one bubble, tier two teams, or at least that iteration, like the expectation needs to be that we beat them. We're going to delude ourselves and say we're beating South Africa tomorrow, but a Japan team is a team that we can front up against. And I think that Scotland team will be one we can front up against as well.
Yeah, no doubt that's I guess very much the case. I guess for if the series does go how we want it to go in terms of that successful side of things, how do you then capitalize on it? I guess how do you launch that forward is the big question. I guess it's probably a repeating question with the USA, right? Because you did knock over Scotland when they've toured previously. There has been big results in years gone by. Obviously, missing the World Cup was a disappointment. So how do you kind of parlay that into future success and what does that look like for you?
Yeah, so the two sides of this, so the rugby side and the marketing side is I think the rugby side is pretty straightforward. Is they have a very young team that and Scott from day one is come into this with an 8-year plan, looking toward that home World Cup, and so big wins now means that young players that'll be around for 2031 have that experience of those high pressure situations and coming out on top. And that's how you start to build a winning culture where the expectation is that USA is competitive with everyone, not that we get moral victories every test series. And that's the rugby side that that's how you start to build that mentality. And then on the commercial side, it is finding that new audience. Is everybody that give one care about USA Rugby was excited about that Scotland win. But unless they then brought 3 of their friends that didn't know about rugby into the fold on the back of that, there's no real difference. And then it leaves the consciousness until the next time USA reassembles. So in the same way that the sevens team, I think, is able to maintain a lot of momentum through the engagement that they build, and the fact that they kind of have longer ongoing seasons helps as well. But this is why we start to bring in the folks that can start to market this properly and not stand on tradition and assume that rugby people will find us. How do we go out and find the people that are going to get excited about this new sport and rooting for America?
Yeah, and I mean, you touched on it there. The sevens, the beauty of it is there's a series, there's an X amount of events once you've qualified. How frustrating is it from a USA perspective that on the 15 side of things, it is tough to obviously get consistency at test level. The Pacific Nations Cup is fantastic. There's guaranteed games there, and that's definitely a full step in the right direction. But it's, I guess, in your experience, having been in the camps, I'm not sure how much for the players, it has been a point. What are these barriers from stopping this? Is it financial, or is it sort of, players away with their clubs, things like that? Or is it sort of a combination of all that's kind of been holding back the USA in terms of getting consistency at the top level?
I think a lot of it is just the landscape as it is. Like we've had Pacific Nations Cup used to be a lot more regular. We had the America's Rugby Championship that was 5 great matches every season. And it's just a shifting landscape that there's nothing set in stone.
Mhm.
And so, again, it's hard to communicate to a new viewer when they should be, gearing up to watch USA Rugby. That if I'm a new football fan, I know starting in September, going through to January, I'm watching football, and similar, for every other sport. And even with the sevens, like I can give you a calendar ahead of time and you know when to watch those events. And with 15s, I don't know, me as a USA player, I don't know until February every year what my calendar is going to look like. And let alone the fans that are then trying to figure that out. And so how do we say that, every 4th of July in Washington, D.C., USA Rugby is putting on the biggest block party / test match event of the year. And so I know that anybody within that DMV area is going to be at whatever field on the 4th of July watching rugby. Like, how do we make these recurring annual events such that people can plan around it and build around it, instead of hearing last minute that there's something happening in their backyard?
Yeah, no, it's a good point. And I guess talking about the backyard, I mean, you've got the likes of sort of Chile, Brazil, sort of all making progress. I guess is that the most logical step, is to try and link with the South American teams and the Canadians and just get that consistency of clashes between. I know there's obviously a want for tier one clashes at all times, but I mean, consistency of matches and then sprinkling a tier one, I guess, is that probably the most effective way forward for the
Yeah,
US?
I think it absolutely is. I think that volume is volume of international tests is a quality all on its own that we should go after. And let's not kid ourselves. We lost to Chile last time we played them. We lost to Uruguay last time we played them. We've played one score matches with Brazil. Until we prove that we are no longer in their pool, which with their growth rate is not going to happen anytime soon. We should be taking advantage of all of that. And look, we got 2 test windows every year. So if we want to do our tier ones and in the summer or in the autumn, or we want to go back to having 3 test windows a year, let's take advantage of that. And one of those can be the ARC or something similar, and then one of those can be the tier one opportunities or mixed opportunities. I just think that I would so much rather have 5 of those ARC matches than this is going to be great, but it's going to be Scotland and Romania, and then that's 2 weeks, and then we're gone until whatever comes next, right? And so the more time that team can be together is the more time that you start to see cohesive styles of play. You start to see players be comfortable with each other, and you just start to build that camaraderie and consistency that you see in tier one nations.
Yeah, and I guess the next step on that, with your experience with the MLR, how open would the clubs be to an expanded international schedule? Is that the million dollar
It's
question?
probably a non-starter. I mean, there's a reason that there's a break before playoffs here, right?
Fine.
But I think that Scott has put together, a fair number of opportunities around all that, as well as, they've taken the kind of the non-23 USA guys, which ends up being a younger team, on tours during MLR seasons. There's ways to get game time, which I realize that comes back to not having tests, but
Mm.
um, figuring out ways to get more volume is important. And so what that ends up looking like at the end of the day, I don't know. And now I'm on the outside looking in, giving you a wish list of nice to haves, but there's a sweet spot of tests a year, and it's definitely more than 6, and it's probably less than 15, but somewhere in there, there's a lot of rugby to be played, and a lot of new players to expose to this international game.
No doubt. Well, I guess what we'll do is let's assume that that's going to happen with USA Rugby. We'll let them take control of that. For you, what does an ideal World Cup look like in 2031? I'll give you a couple of a multi-layered question on this, I guess. Firstly, from a sort of format in terms of, is it going to be in one location would be your ideal, or do you take the circus on the road sort of thing? And then I guess number two, how achievable would be, in terms of a knockout appearance like Japan managed to do at their home World Cup for the US. How, there's this 8 year run in, like you said, you've got Scott in place now. How confident would you be that the US can get themselves together and get to that point?
Yeah, so I mean, my ideal World Cup is definitely a regional pool system. I think it's too great an event to try to monopolize somewhere. And it's too big a country as well to try to make people hop around between, coasts, basically between pool games. Having played in a World Cup, I can tell you that travel can kill you if it's not well managed. And having played an MLR, I can tell you that even when it is well managed, flying from New York to Seattle to try to play a rugby game is just not ideal for performance. So you get a northeast and a southeast and a southwest and a midwest, and um, northwest pool or whatever, and then you play out your pools there, and then decide where you want to have those knockouts. But I think with the infrastructure that's in this country, it'd be a shame not to spread that around. And if you want to try to theme it as well and put Ireland, near Boston, and Fiji on the West Coast, like let's try to do that too, right? Get the right crowds matched up with the right pools.
Yeah,
Um,
that's such a cool way of looking at it. Yeah, I do like that. I mean, I guess that's what makes this World Cup so unique, right? Is rugby's never been to a country where sport is on the scale that it is in the US. I mean, France rugby's already big, but it's very regionalized down to the south. But I guess, like you're saying, in the US, coast to coast is completely different, and everything in between is completely different. And those travel factors are very interesting. I do like that pool. I wonder how they'll have to fix the draw to get that done, but
yeah, exactly right.
no doubt. And then I guess the performance side of things, how realistic is a quarterfinal? I guess by that point there'll likely be a last 16 anyway, based on the way things are trending. But yeah.
No, I think a quarterfinal is very reasonable. I think that the trajectory that we are trying to build, and if things go well, we are going to be competitive, with that, with at least some of the tier one nations by that point. which means that it's going to be somewhat dependent on pool draw. But the expectation I know, and Scott will say this publicly, is that the expectation is that we are into the knockouts, if not winning knockouts within 8 years. Um, and I think that it'd be a shame to set our sights any lower than that. Because again, since USA Rugby has, been professionalized anyways, it's been moral victories. We played Ireland close that one time. Remember that time? Um, but no, if we want to transform this sport and honestly also bring in new fans, Americans like winners. When the men's soccer team doesn't even make the World Cup, nobody cares about them, right? We love the women, one, because it's good soccer, and also because they're winners. That's why we cheer for them. And so we need to be able to paint ourselves with that same brush and say, come cheer for America, come watch rugby. It's this new awesome sport. And oh, by the way, USA is kicking ass, and that's exactly why you should watch it.
On that note, Nate, thank you so much. I'm just going to stop our recording there.